Welcome to Keeping Up at the Capitol with Senator Tom Casperson. This program comes to you each month from Lansing to keep you informed on issues important to the UP. This week, Senator Casperson discusses county funding and payment in lieu of taxes, commonly known as PILT, with Senator Darwin Booher and Michigan Association of Counties Legislative Affairs Director Ben Bodkin. And now, let's join Senator Casperson and his guests.
Okay, today the topic for Keeping Up at the Capitol, we're going to talk about PILT payments. And I've got my two guests, Darwin Booher, Senator Booher, and Ben Bodkin with Michigan Association of Counties. And so what we'll start out with is have both of you introduce yourselves, tell our audience a little bit about who you are. So maybe Senator Booher, you could get started.
Well, thanks, Tom. If it's all right, I'll call you Tom because we've now worked together 6-7 years, and it's been a pleasure. We have a lot of similarities. I am Senator Darwin Booher from the 35th Senate District, which represents 11 counties in the northwest central part of the Lower Peninsula. Tom, between you and I, you with 13 and I with 11, we represent 24 counties out of the 83 counties in the state. My prior life, I was a banker, 41 years, and a farmer. And I was township supervisor and the assessor for 28 years as well. So that's a little bit about who I am.
Ben, if you could, people might wonder, the county association, we're talking about with state senators, land, how does that work? But go ahead.
Sure. Well, Senator, thank you for having me on today. I wanted to be here to talk about the importance of PILT payments to counties. I am Ben Bodkin. I work for the Michigan Association of Counties. I'm Director of Legislative Affairs there. And so I represent directly county commissioners before the state legislature in Lansing. And again, appreciate you having me on. Good.
Darwin, and can I call you Darwin?
Sure,
we have
yes.
worked together quite a bit. Maybe start explaining to the viewers a little bit about the PILT payment, what it means. It's an acronym, so what that means, and maybe explain a little bit about what we're up to right now.
Yeah. Well, Tom, the PILT payments are just that, payments in lieu of taxes. And so when we talk about three components of PILT, the swamp tax, $2, and tax reverted, that's one component of it. Purchase land is a second component of the PILT. Commercial Forest Act is another component of that, in all with a different payment schedule. Basically, commercial forest is $1.25 now. So that makes up what we, in 1933, when we went back, we go back to that date of any purchased land, then the tax law, as an assessor, didn't allow us to tax on general property tax law doesn't exempt state-owned property, but natural resource came through and agreed to pay PILT in lieu of those taxes. And the state assesses their own land. I, as an assessor, couldn't assess it, so they set the value and they pay the taxes based on that, whatever that number happens to be. So that's a little bit about understanding a little bit about what PILT is.
Ben, you've got a little bit of a different angle here, and I know that Darwin and I talk about taxes almost sometimes in a negative way. Taxes are too high, and we got to find ways to reform government, be streamlined, and spend the money wisely that we take from taxpayers. But in your case, you're on the receiving end of this PILT payment. Explain to us a little bit of some of the difficulties, because ironically, I think we're all on the same page here when it comes to taxes in this particular case. So maybe you could explain some of the pitfalls that you find yourself in because of PILT.
Certainly. Yeah, anytime the state or federal government purchases property, comes into ownership of property in the state of Michigan, that property comes off the tax rolls. So that's no longer taxable land. The state doesn't pay a tax the same as you and I do for our house. Neither does the federal government. So when that occurs, when the state comes into land, then they owe payment in lieu of taxes. And what that means is basically the state would pay an amount to the local jurisdiction, county, township, rarely cities, but counties and townships are really the larger PILT jurisdictions in order for them to be able to maintain the services that in many cases the state requires of us because of that land's no longer on the rolls. So the problem that we have is that in some of our counties, in your neck of the woods, and in your neck of the woods especially, we have very high government ownership of land. So we have large tracts of federal land, large tracts of state land. In Port-Luce County, we're talking about 50% state-owned, 51%, okay? That's a lot. So the property taxes that the county relies on in order to fund the courts, in order to fund foster care and juvenile justice and sheriff patrol, etc., all the things counties do on the state's behalf for our residents, half of that real estate is not taxable. So the property taxes are disproportionately high on the residents there because of the state's ownership of land or the federal government's ownership of land. And so it's very, very important that the state make what equates to its property taxes to those counties in order to help distribute the burden down so that the citizens of those counties aren't paying such a high percentage of the freight on the services there. Unfortunately, we find that the state has difficulty making its PILT payments or funding its PILT payments fully, which is a problem because, again, we have to provide the services and we rely, especially in those heavy federal and state-owned areas, on those PILT payments to make those services go.
Now, Darwin, getting to that a little bit, the state purchases land in different forms. One of those would be what we call the trust fund. And the trust fund is money that's made up from royalties that we receive as a state from gas and oil and minerals, gravel pits, things like that. And that fund has an awful lot of money in it. And it has the system, the way it was set up, actually worked. And it's a good system, except in my opinion, it seems like it's almost worked too well. And what it's done is created a system that the state can continue to buy more and more and more land. The problem with it has been, as they buy the land, on the other end of it, the state can't keep up with the tax revenue to own all that land, their PILT payment. So there was a bill that was put in place, was there not, to at least address that portion of it, which is a really small portion at this point of the overall land they own. But it did address that the PILT payment would make sure that the land purchased with trust fund money would be paid in full. Is that how that works?
That's true, yeah. Tom, that's true. And I think as we talk about this issue of purchased land, I don't think you or I or anyone down here is complaining about what they did in the past. We are saying that 4.5 million acres in the state owned, 12% of all the land in this state is owned by the state. If you add 8% of federal land to that, that's 20% of our land is owned by the federal government or state. Now, we have come to a point, the money belongs to all of us, the money that you're talking about, oil and gas, lease, minerals, gravel, belongs to all the people. Our people are saying, hold on, enough. We want you to look at this issue. So we're not saying what you did in the past is wrong. What we're saying is, give us a reason now. Give us the reason that you need to have this. Roscommon County, one of my counties, 70% owned, over 200 and some thousand acres owned by the state of Michigan now. Kalkaska County, another one of mine, 163,000 acres now owned. We're saying, hold on now. Our people need services as well, fire, police, emergency vehicles as well. But if you can't pay your payments, if you can't afford to pay your payment, then we have to bring this thing to a halt, and you set up a long-term plan for the purchase of land. I mean, I think it's the right thing to do. It's a fair thing to do. And our 260,000 people in my Senate district, yours as well, are saying, yeah, it worked. It worked. But from going forth, guys, you need to do something about this and help us. Maybe there's land that needs to stay in the private hands. and pay taxes like everybody else does. And so that's where we're at with this, and we'll talk here in a few minutes about your bill and mine, 1021 and 1022, and what they do. If you'd like, I would kind of go into those, Tom, but those are two very important bills, I think, to go forth with the purchase of land in our state. And so mine says, 1022 says you'll pay those payments by February the 14th. When everybody else pays their taxes, you pay them. And from that, if you don't, you will pay a penalty, just like I do if I don't. Townships and counties, you must submit those bills so we have them, so we can pay them. If you don't, and that's always the comeback has been in my prior terms down here and talking about PIL, is we aren't submitting the bills on time. Well, then the penalty will be there too. That's 1022. Your bill, of course, you can talk about that, but it upset swamp tax. It hasn't been changed since 1986, and if you did the inflation rate to that, it should be $4 or over $4 now. So, and there's other issues with yours as well, and I won't go into your bill, but it's the fairness issue that I think that we're going back and saying, owners of property, you have to all comply by the same rules.
Yeah, I agree. And Ben, maybe we could use maybe just a small example, but so the viewers understand what we're talking about here, the magnitude of the difference. And what I mean by that is, I know there's some places, some counties that probably aren't dealing with a whole lot of government-owned land in the sense of state or federal ownership, but they have some development, they have homes, they have some businesses, they have development that creates a tax base for them that their issue wouldn't be the same as many of the counties that are dealing with all this land. And the difference is the tax base, and it's significant. I think the viewers need to realize, and hopefully we can share that with them where they can see it, that we're not just talking a couple dollars here. We are talking millions of dollars of the difference if the state didn't own the land versus the private sector owning land. And I think Darwin and I are on the same page. We're not saying what they did in the past was wrong. They did some good things. We've got some land that the state owns that is good land, and it's for the public good. So I get that, but could you just explain a little bit to us? You don't have to get into big detail, but there is a major difference between the private sector owning the land and the state owning the land when it comes to your revenue base to run your operations for all the services that Darwin mentioned.
Yeah, in many cases where you're talking about the state PILT payment being $2 an acre or $1.25 an acre on commercial forest land. You know, if you could get $2 an acre on your property, that's probably a pretty good deal, right? Yeah. So, I mean, all your viewers out there that are homeowners can relate to what they pay in property taxes and then what the state pays in property taxes. It's a huge difference. I mean, the state's getting a great deal on owning this land. The downside is that because it's such a good deal that the state pays, the county is having difficulty up in the northern areas, especially because those are the high percentage counties of PILT land, that it's just difficult to make the services go. If that was privately owned, there would be no problem, you know, because the property taxes, the equivalent of the state's tax, would bring in much more revenue, even at a very low rate, you know, and if it was privately owned, you know, the property tax rate would probably be lower because it would be spread out over more property owners, more land, more acreage, etc. And so, you know, everyone in that county would probably pay a little less.
So it is fair to say, because it appears that way, that it really, with government-owned land, in this case state and federal, it really does shift the burden to the private sector, which then the tax rates to the private sector, you could make an argument, reflect that. Because you don't have the ability as a government agency, a local government agency, to spread that cost out so more or less everybody's paying their fair share. You have to shift it to one side because you've got one side either not making the payment in full or the rate they actually pay is pretty darn low. comparably speaking. There's no equalness here. It's completely the other way.
Yeah, I think my members would argue that the state is probably not paying its fair share of the tax burden in their county. Absolutely.
Darwin, anything to add to that?
No, I think that's absolutely true. I think that as an assessor in my own township for 28 years, and we had 6 sections of land belong to the state of Michigan. I could not even go in and assess it. I mean, here I'm assessing everything around it. I'm setting the value for it. I'm state certified. I can't set the value. The state has set the value. You could argue that issue of assessment, fairness, whether it is because it's a large chunk, you can't assess it as high as I would. Well, divided down to 40 is what I'm got connecting to you. It should be worth as much as any other land. I've had those discussions since I've been here in the House and now in the Senate. But make a good case for they're not paying what they should be paying if everything's equal.
You know, to that point, another thing maybe we could help clear up, and I fell into this category years ago when I looked at this. I always assumed that the Department of Natural Resources, DNR in this case, was kind of heading up the idea or the concept of buying the land, to put land together, better to have it contiguous, big tracts of land for us to keep in the public trust so we can enjoy it forever and ever. Then I also assumed, knowing that, I always assumed that the DNR somehow through their budget paid the taxes. But that's not necessarily how it works at all. The DNR works with others to buy the land, but the liability or the responsibility for paying the tax falls on the state of Michigan, which is the taxpayers, or we the people. And we in the legislature, and especially guys like you, Darwin, that are on appropriations, you end up with the burden of figuring out how you're going to pay that bill. So I also think that's where there's a disconnect too. You got one entity buying, and you got the other entity having to pay the bill, if you will, on the tax liability. And there needs to be a coming together there too. And you mentioned the bills. That would be one of my goals, that we're communicating back and forth now to say, wait a minute, we don't have the money. Is that a fair assessment?
I think, Tom, that's fair. And Ben, I would be interested in hearing your side of that. I believe when you're talking about the state of Michigan, in my particular situation on the appropriations all the time I've been here, 8 budget years now, it is the people paying. I don't care whether you take it out of the trust fund. I don't care whether you take it out of the general fund. I don't care whether you take it out of any other fund. The fact is, we are the people.
That's right.
And so when we forget about that and said, we want to buy this, we want this, you forget who pays. It's us, the people. And so I believe we kind of lost track of that. Who, in fact, is paying for this? And let's get back to that. Do we, locals, if you want it, you sign a resolution that you, in fact, want that. County, give us a resolution that says, state, buy that. It's good for us. Township, send me that resolution that we support that. No, you got some townships that are 80% owned by the state. Holy cow, do I want any more? So I think in your bills and my bills, we're trying to address those kind of issues.
Ben, maybe you could talk to this, because to me, the burden gets shifted to you on the local level. And there's some blame there too, in the sense if the public doesn't feel like you're providing services that they think you should, you bear that burden. And yet, unfairly, in my opinion, the state has created a scenario for you to be blamed for something that's not your fault. Is that fair?
Yeah, to an extent. From our perspective, we're trying to look at things at the local level because we have to. Things are to a point now at the local level that there is no excess. There is no way to make up the gap that's being left at the local level. We've seen more and more services pushed down to counties from the state because of the economic climate in the state and the budget and that kind of thing. At the same time, we've seen payments from the state from various things, state revenue sharing, PILT, jail reimbursement, you name it, court equity fund, etc., health departments. All that funding has been cut and cut and cut and cut. And so we have, in recent years, begun looking at things in a more holistic manner. I think in Lansing still we have somewhat of a siloed arrangement. You touched on it when you said, you know, the purchasing comes out of one department in DNR, and the payment comes out of another department through the legislature and the Treasury. And so, you know, are they talking? Are they not talking? You know, how does all that work? And we're finding the same thing. You know, we reduce PILT payments to counties and townships, but you know, we're going to require them to continue to fund the courts at the same level that they've been funding them, or we're going to, you know, we wonder why crime arrests are down. You know, well, it's because we don't have people on the road as much as we used to. You know, to look into crime and that kind of thing. So the services that we're able to provide have kind of shrunk a little bit. The expectation is that we need to have those services out there. We're doing the very best that we can with what we have. But we're to a point now where we have to start looking both at the state and the local level more holistically at what we're doing, how we're doing it, and find ways to work together on it. And part of that, I think, in the bills that you and Senator Booher have are going to force the state to do that a little more. Find out what the local unit wants, whether they want more purchased land in their jurisdiction or not. Find out what the PILT payment might be before they purchase it. You know, that seems reasonable, right?
Yeah.
So those are the kind of things that we're really excited about with the bills that you have.
Darwin, Ben mentioned the bills. One of the visions I had was not only get to the fairness side of it, but also a little bit of an educational component to this, and that is, you know, as we've talked before with our colleagues in caucus and discuss issues like this, sometimes if I'm a member that doesn't come from an area that has this type of issue, really, there's not a lot of state ownership of land in my district, I rightfully so maybe either don't understand it or it's not a big concern because I don't have that problem. I'm hoping that through this, and maybe you could weigh in too, you mentioned how many counties both you and I represent in the state. There's no other districts bigger than yours and mine with state ownership. That other members now will see the burden or the responsibility or the liability, whatever word you want to use, that comes through ownership of state-owned land, and we all bear that responsibility. Is it fair?
No, that's fair, Tom. If you added to Senator Walker and Senator Molinar to this list, to you and I, 43 of the 83 counties are represented by us. 43.
Half of all the counties.
How many votes does it take to pass something? 20. 16 more votes have to come south of those 43 counties. That's not an easy task for senators. But I believe very strongly that you and I will, and with the help of the counties and the townships, will be able to show them and let them understand and get them to understand why it's so important to them as well as us that we pay our fair share when we buy. I believe that they have to be able to understand that. When we talk about $12 million over the whole picture, and we froze it before I got here in 2004, that was frozen. There we sat with a millage still at 2004. It's like, to me, an unfunded liability. We owe. We're trying to take care of those now in other ways in our state. Unfunded liability. This is something that we took advantage of, the state, in the hard times, and have proceeded to continue to either cut them 15% on top of that, and then 15% again, or 12%, and then 15, and 50. No, we've used that as a source. We owe it. Go back and get it, correct it, and move on this issue. I mean, then I think going forth with your bill, with capping and saying, really, really capped if you need something, but yet 4.5 million acres we need to look at this for. And I think all that stuff is all tying in. And I believe we can get 16 others to agree that this is a fairness issue.
I think you're right.
I was just going to say the same thing. It's a fairness issue. You know, it makes sense that we all love those of us who aren't blessed enough to live in your areas, you know, where we have some of the most beautiful land in the state. Not only that, but in the whole country. You know, that some of that certainly needs to be set aside for all of us to enjoy and go visit. But it is a fairness issue. You know, if I want to use the land up there, and that's going to be in a public trust, you know, I have a responsibility to pay some of that. You know what I mean, as a taxpayer of Michigan. And so, you know, there's a responsibility there. There's also, I think, in the bills collectively, both 248, the one that capped the amount of land, but also 1021 and 1022, we are starting to look at PILT and state land ownership more as a whole. And so there are some reforms in there about, you know, how are we going to manage the land? What's the plan long term for state ownership of land? Are we going to go to large tracts? Are we going to, you know, preserve the most beautiful places? What are we going to do? How are we going to do this? And that's never been done before. Amazingly, it's never been done before. But it's going to be done now with these bills. We're going to start having consequences for the state if they don't pay their PILT payments if these bills are passed. So there will be an incentive for the state to start making those payments, an incentive for the state to start managing its land more effectively, which is going to benefit the whole state because we're going to be more efficient with what we're doing, and we're also going to be looking at management for the first time, really.
Ben, we're running out of time, and we're going to wrap it up here, but I sense fairness as an issue, purpose. We didn't talk a lot about purpose, but why do they own the land? What's the purpose of it? And those type of things. Any other thing you can think of as kind of give the audience something to think about as to what's going on here? The fairness, the purpose, and the just the concept of the state ownership, I think, is something we need to, as a society, talk about. Darwin, any last thoughts?
No, I just think if you're going to buy, you pay. And I think hopefully the people understand that you and I and other people down here are really looking at this. This isn't something we just give lip service to. We are trying to make a difference in our communities where we represent. And this is one of the issues we hear. So fairness, buy only if you have it. And there's people here seriously trying to make a difference in this. And I think, I hope that your audience understands that.
Very good. Well, I want to thank the audience for keeping up at the Capitol and tuning in. Thank you.